Look at her. She thinks she's above everyone else. The voice, a smug baritone belonging to a businessman named Preston Vance, slid through the cabin's tense air like a shard of glass. He sat calmly in his first-class seat, even as turbulence rattled the plane. But his judgment, aimed like a dart across the aisle, was meant for the woman in economy. Anya Sharma sat with her back straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Her plain gray sweater seemed to absorb the light, making her blend into the worn upholstery of her seat. The plane lurched again, a violent shudder that sent a ripple of gasps through the passengers. Overhead bins creaked a weary protest, and the metallic rattle of service carts echoed from the galley. Most passengers gripped their armrests, their knuckles turning a bloodless white. Their breaths were short, jagged things, stolen by fear. Anya didn't flinch. Her eyes were closed, not in fear, but in a state of profound focus. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a silent metronome counting against the chaos. Beside her, a little girl of maybe 6, named Mia, clutched a stuffed rabbit with such force that its button eyes seemed to bulge. Her small face was a mess of tears and terror, her sobs lost in the engine's drone. Anya opened her eyes, the color of deep, still water. She glanced at the girl, offering not a smile, but a small, single nod. It was a silent promise, a transmission of strength that transcended words. Mia stared back, her terrified sobs hiccuping to a halt. As if hypnotized, the little girl's breathing began to slow, unconsciously mimicking the steady rhythm of the woman beside her. Across the aisle, Candace Shaw, a woman encased in a bright pink blazer with nails painted to match, leaned toward Preston Vance. She whispered, though her voice was calibrated for an audience. "No emotion at all. What's wrong with her? Doesn't she get how serious this is?" Preston, his silk tie loosened, and the gold of his Rolex glinting under the cabin lights, snorted. "Yeah, probably some nobody who thinks she's too good to panic with the rest of us. Probably her first time on a plane, thinks this is normal." His voice was sharp and self-satisfied, drawing a few nervous chuckles from those nearby who were desperate for any distraction from their fear. Anya's eyes flickered toward him for a fraction of a second. Her face remained unreadable, a placid lake hiding unfathomable depths. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head was enough. It held a quiet authority that made Preston shift in his seat, his smirk faltering for just a moment before he recovered it. The turbulence subsided, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. The whispers, however, did not. They coiled in the recycled air, thick with judgment. Anya closed her eyes again, retreating into the fortress of her mind. She wasn't ignoring them. She was cataloging them, filing them away as environmental data. The arrogance of the businessman, the vapid cruelty of the woman in pink, the contagious fear of the others, they were all variables in an equation she hadn't yet been asked to solve. For now, there was only the rise and fall of her own breath, a steady anchor in a trembling iron cage suspended 7 miles above the earth. The calm was a fragile illusion, shattered in an instant. The cabin door to the cockpit slammed open with a deafening crack. 5 men in dark tactical gear and black masks stormed in, their boots heavy and silent on the carpet. Guns gleamed in their hands, compact, deadly pistols held with practiced ease. The air, already thin with altitude and anxiety, was suddenly sucked from the cabin, replaced by a cold, metallic dread. The leader, a tall figure in a black cap, moved with predatory grace. He grabbed a flight attendant, Elise, by the arm, yanking her toward the front. Her name tag, pinned neatly to her uniform, seemed a pathetic detail of a normal world that no longer existed. She stumbled, her face a mask of pale shock, a small gasp escaping her lips. The leader pressed the muzzle of his gun to her temple. The cold metal against her skin made her flinch. He raised a handheld radio, his voice crackling through the cabin's speakers, a sound like gravel grinding stone. "Ground control, listen up. $50 million, an armored vehicle, a clear runway. You have 1 hour, or she's dead." The dam of restrained panic broke. The cabin erupted in a symphony of terror. Screams tore through the air, raw and desperate. Passengers ducked, some sliding to the floor in a futile attempt to hide, others clutching each other, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. Elise's eyes, wide with terror, darted around the cabin, silently pleading, but she didn't make a sound, her training battling against her primal fear. And through it all, Anya Sharma did not move. Her hands remained resting in her lap, her breathing even. This stillness, once a subject of mockery, now became something monstrous in the eyes of the other passengers. It was unnatural, inhuman. From his crouched position, Kyler, a young man in a hoodie who had been trying to look tough just minutes before, now pointed a trembling finger at her. His voice was a reedy, panicked squeak. "Look at her. She's too calm. She has to be with them." Heads turned, eyes, wide with fear, now narrowed with suspicion. The seed of his accusation found fertile ground in their terrified minds. It was an explanation, a tangible thing to blame in a situation that was incomprehensibly awful. Candace Shaw hissed from behind her manicured hands, "Why is she just sitting there? She's not even scared." Preston Vance leaned forward, his face flushed a blotchy red. "What are you, some kind of plant? You're freaking everyone out more than they are." Anya's gaze met his. It was steady and unflinching. Within that gaze was not emptiness, but an intense, laser-like focus. Her mind was a whirlwind of activity, a stark contrast to her placid exterior. 5 hostiles. Leader, central position, using the flight attendant as a shield. Poor fire discipline, finger on the trigger. 2 watching the rear, 2 flanking. Standard 9mm sidearms, no long guns. A takeover, not a suicide mission. They want something. She spoke, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the ambient hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. "I am not with them." Her tone held an absolute finality, a door clicking shut. Preston Vance opened his mouth, a retort ready on his lips, then closed it. Something in her eyes, a depth of certainty he had never encountered in his boardrooms and negotiations, made him sink back into his seat, momentarily silenced. The eruption of fear had happened, but within Anya, a different kind of storm was gathering, one of cold, precise calculation. Fear, when left to fester in a confined space, often curdles into something uglier: blame. The passengers, stripped of all agency, trapped in a metal tube with death as a co-pilot, needed a target for their terror. The masked men were an abstract horror, but Anya Sharma was right there. Her unnatural calm was an irritant, a deviation from the shared script of panic, and they turned on her with the ferocity of a cornered animal. A man in his 50s, his expensive suit now wrinkled, and his face etched with worry, clutched a framed photo of his wife and children. His voice broke as he glared at Anya. "You're not even trying to help. What kind of person just sits there while this is happening?" His words were raw with a genuine, heartbreaking fear for his loved ones, and his anguish fanned the flames of the cabin's anger. Passengers nodded in fervent agreement, their glares pinning her to her seat. Anya's eyes softened for a moment as she caught sight of the photograph. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady, yet laced with an unexpected kindness. "Your family is waiting for you. Stay calm for them." The man blinked, his anger faltering. Her words hadn't dismissed his fear. They had acknowledged its source and offered a path through it. He looked at her, confused but quieter, sinking back into his seat and tightening his grip on the photo. Under the sleeve of her gray sweater, unnoticed by the frantic eyes around her, Anya's fingers brushed the face of her simple black smartwatch. Her thumb began to tap a sequence against the bezel, a complex rhythm of long and short presses, so subtle it looked like she was merely adjusting her cuff or fidgeting with a nervous tick. It was a silent, invisible scream for help, a coded message winging its way across satellites. Miles below, in a dimly lit control room, that scream was heard. A single dot on a vast digital map of the airspace blinked from green to amber. A stern, focused man with salt and pepper hair, Colonel Evans, stared at the screen. "Agent Sharma is in position and has confirmed a code black," he said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Hostile takeover. Initiate protocol." The room around him exploded into a quiet flurry of efficient activity. Analysts scrambled, pulling up satellite feeds, flight manifests, and secure radio channels. Back on the plane, the crucible was growing hotter. Anya leaned toward Mia's mother, her voice barely a whisper, a private confidence in a public nightmare. "They need leverage. They won't start shooting yet. It goes against their objective." The mother's eyes widened, her hands shaking. How? How do you know that?" she whispered back. But before Anya could answer, Kyler overheard from the row behind. Fueled by adrenaline and the mob mentality, he snapped, "Stop talking! You're gonna get us all killed!" "What are you telling her? Secrets?" The black-capped leader paced the aisle, his gun still pressed to Elise's head. His men fanned out, their presence a suffocating blanket of menace. The accusations against Anya became a low, hateful hum, the new background noise of the hijacking. She was no longer just a strange woman. She was a threat, a traitor, the focal point of all their impotent rage. And through it all, she absorbed their hatred, her face a mask of calm, her mind a chessboard where the next move was already being calculated. The 60-minute deadline was now a ticking clock inside every passenger's skull. Each second stretched into an eternity of dreadful anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and the sound of muffled prayers. The leader's patience, already thin, was snapping. His radio crackled with static, no voice of salvation coming from the ground. 10 minutes, he screamed, the sound distorted and furious. 10 minutes, or her brains will be on the ceiling. To punctuate his threat, he shoved Elise forward. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself on a seat back, a choked sob finally escaping her lips. The cabin was a chorus of despair. A man in a cheap suit, his tie askew, stood up, his voice cracking. "Just give them what they want, please." A woman across the aisle, clutching a designer purse to her chest as if it were a life vest, trembled. "If we don't, we're all dead." Their terrified eyes, one after another, turned to Anya, their gazes like stones. She was the anomaly, the unbroken variable, and therefore, somehow, the cause. Candace Shaw, her pink blazer, a garish splash of color in the grim tableau, spat the words out. What's with her, sitting there all serene, like she's better than us? Do something. It was Preston Vance who appointed himself their spokesman. He stood up, his face flushed with a mixture of panic and his usual entitlement, pointing a finger that had only ever been used to command subordinates. "You're jinxing us," he bellowed. "Your attitude, it's provocative. It's going to get that poor woman killed." A murmur of agreement rippled through the passengers. Their fear had found its voice in him. In their terror-addled minds, Anya's calm was a form of defiance that would surely anger their captors. Anya's eyes, which had been fixed on the leader, flicked to Preston. Her face remained still, but she tilted her chin upward slightly. It was a gesture of such subtle, unshakable confidence that it silenced him for a moment. "Panic," she said, her voice not loud, but piercing the cacophony, "will not save her." Preston blinked, his accusatory hand dropping to his side. He sank back into his seat, the gold of his watch clinking against the armrest, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. The cabin's hostility toward Anya solidified into a low hum of resentment, but she had already dismissed them. Her gaze returned to the leader. Her internal clock was ticking too. She was analyzing his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously. He was losing control. The negotiation window was closing. She thought of a dusty training room years ago, her instructor's voice echoing in her memory. "You don't control the fight, you control the room. Find the fulcrum, and the world will move for you." She looked at the terrified face of Elise. She glanced at the small, trusting eyes of Mia, who was watching her, not the men with guns. Mia was her fulcrum. The time for observation was over. The time for action was at hand. The abyss was before them, and Anya Sharma was the only one prepared to build a bridge across it. Then Anya stood. The motion was not sudden or jerky. It was fluid, deliberate, a single, smooth unfolding that seemed to bend the very air in the cabin around her. Every head, including those of the hijackers, snapped in her direction. A profound silence fell, a collective intake of breath. "Your biggest mistake," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the cabin, "was letting me sit here for too long." The leader spun toward her, his gun swinging in a menacing arc. "What did you say?" he snapped, his confusion momentarily overriding his aggression. That moment was all Anya needed. In a flash of motion that defied belief, she closed the 10-foot distance between them in two long, silent strides. Her hands, which had rested so peacefully in her lap, were a blur. One hand deflected the gun barrel upwards, while the other clamped onto the leader's wrist, twisting with surgical precision. There was a sickening crack of bone. The gun clattered to the floor. Before he could even register the pain, Her elbow struck his jaw with brutal efficiency. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled, unconscious before he hit the carpet. The cabin froze. Every breath was held, every mind struggling to process the impossible sight. Anya didn't stop. She was a whirlwind of controlled violence. She spun, her body moving with an economy of motion that was both terrifying and beautiful. The scarred henchman nearest to her raised his weapon, but he was too slow. A precise strike to his inner wrist sent his gun flying. He dropped to his knees, clutching his arm. A howl of pain caught in his throat. The stocky one lunged, a clumsy, rage-fueled attack. Anya sidestepped with the grace of a dancer, her knee driving hard into his solar plexus. The air rushed out of him in a whoosh, and he folded in on himself, collapsing to the ground, gasping like a landed fish. The other two, positioned at the rear of the cabin, barely had time to react. One raised his pistol, but a sharp, open-handed jab to his throat from Anya, who had somehow already crossed the distance, crushed his larynx. He dropped his weapon, clawing at his neck, making a terrible gurgling sound. The last man, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror behind his mask, met a powerful kick to his midsection that lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into a row of seats, where he lay, moaning and utterly broken. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. All 5 hijackers were down, incapacitated. Guns were scattered harmlessly across the aisle. The cabin was silent, save for Elise's shaky, ragged breaths as she sank to her knees, free. The passengers stared, their mouths agape, their hands trembling. The spectacle of violence was so swift, so absolute, it felt like a scene from a movie, too surreal to be real. Kyler, the boy in the hoodie, stammered, his voice a disbelieving whisper. Who are you? Candace Shaw, her face pale under her makeup, whispered to no one in particular. She looked so ordinary. Preston Vance's face was the color of ash. His hands, which had been pointing in accusation just moments before, were now gripping his armrests, as if he might fall out of his seat and into the earth itself. He stared at the unassuming woman in the gray sweater, who was now calmly picking up the scattered firearms and securing them. The woman he had dismissed as a nobody had just dismantled a team of armed terrorists with her bare hands. The world, as he knew it, had been turned completely upside down. Anya Sharma, without raising her voice, had just unveiled the truth. Just as Anya finished securing the last of the weapons with zip ties she produced from a hidden pocket in her worn canvas bag, the main cabin door burst open. Armed Special Forces operators swarmed in, their faces grim, weapons raised, expecting a firefight. They froze, their tactical advance coming to an abrupt halt. The scene before them was not what they had prepared for. The hijackers were subdued, bound, and groaning on the floor. The passengers were staring, shell-shocked but unharmed. And in the middle of it all stood a single woman in a gray sweater, her breathing even, her expression calm. Their commander, a tall man with a gray buzz cut and the sharp eyes of a hawk, stepped forward. His gaze swept the scene, instantly comprehending. He locked eyes with Anya. His stern expression softened with professional respect. He snapped to attention, raising a hand in a crisp, formal salute. Agent Sharma. His voice boomed in the silent cabin. Outstanding, as always. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. The words hung in the air, a stunning revelation that recontextualized everything they had witnessed, everything they had said. Agent, the dam of their confusion and shock broke, not into screams this time, but into a wave of applause. It started with one person, then 2, then a dozen, until the entire cabin was roaring with a thunderous ovation. It was a sound of immense relief, of profound gratitude, and of deep, gut-wrenching shame. Preston Vance felt the blood drain from his face. The title agent echoed in his mind, mocking his earlier assessment of nobody. He had built an empire on judging people, on sizing them up and exploiting their weaknesses. For the first time, he understood he had made a catastrophic miscalculation, and the person he had misjudged had just saved his life. He slowly, deliberately hid his Rolex under his cuff, the ostentatious symbol of his status suddenly feeling cheap and vulgar. Candace Shaw stared at her perfectly manicured nails, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Her cruel whispers, her confident disdain at all replayed in her mind, now sounding petty and foolish. She had judged a book by its plain cover, and found it to be a masterclass in survival. Kyler pulled his hood over his head, wishing he could disappear. His panicked accusation, "She's with them," burned in his memory. He had pointed a finger at their savior. The man clutching the family photo simply wept, tears of relief and remorse streaming down his face. Amidst the applause and the dawning comprehension, Anya Sharma simply gave the colonel a small nod of acknowledgement. She walked back to her seat, her movements as deliberate as ever, and sat down. She adjusted her sweater, brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, and picked up her bag. To anyone watching, it was as if she had just completed a routine task, like filing a report or finishing a crossword puzzle. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their validation. The truth had been revealed, and its weight was now settling upon the shoulders of those who had been so quick to deny it. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, a mundane end to a harrowing ordeal. As the passengers deplaned onto the tarmac, blinking in the harsh glare of emergency lights, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words. The cacophony of fear had been replaced by a thick, contemplative silence. The aftermath came swiftly, not from any action of Anya's, but from the simple, unblinking eye of truth. In the age of social media, the story of Flight 227 went viral. Cell phone snippets, shaky and terrified, were pieced together by news outlets. The words of the accusers, once lost in the cabin's chaos, were now broadcast for the world to hear. Preston Vance, whose name was quickly identified, became the face of arrogant entitlement. A leaked internal email showed him trying to spin the story to portray himself as a calming influence. A lie so blatant it backfired spectacularly. His firm, citing conduct unbecoming of a partner, quietly let him go the following week. His reputation, built over decades, was incinerated in a day. Candace Shaw, a minor influencer, found her world collapsing. The clips of her snide comments, replayed ad nauseum online, were toxic to the brands she represented. Her sponsorships vanished overnight. Her public apology, full of carefully crafted buzzwords, was seen as hollow and self-serving. Kyler deleted his social media accounts, but he couldn't escape the fallout. His friends, seeing his face in the news clips, grew distant. His attempt to joke about the flight as a crazy story was met with disgusted silence. The echo of his own panicked cruelty followed him. They never faced Anya again. They didn't need to. The court of public opinion, amplified by their own recorded words, delivered a verdict far more crushing than any she could have offered. As Anya stepped off the plane, her bag slung over her shoulder, the little girl, Mia, waved from her mother's arms, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Anya allowed a small, genuine smile to break through her composure and waved back. Colonel Evans walked beside her, his voice low. "You didn't have to step in, Sharma. We had a team ready to breach." Anya shrugged, her eyes scanning the tarmac, already moving on to the next task. "They didn't have time," she said simply. It was a statement of fact, not of pride. The other passengers watched her go, some still clapping softly, others just staring as if trying to reconcile the ordinary woman with the extraordinary warrior. As the crowd parted for her, a woman in a simple coat, her hair graying and her hands folded tightly, approached. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I judged you," she said, her voice soft but heavy with emotion. "In my heart, I thought you were cold, that you didn't care. I was so wrong." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. Anya paused and looked at the woman. Her gaze was not accusatory, but gentle. "It's okay," she said, and in those two words, there was a universe of understanding. She had seen fear do far worse things to people. She continued walking, her steps even and sure. A memory surfaced, clear as day, a different airport, years ago, her father's hand on her shoulder. He was a man of few words, a former soldier whose silence held more wisdom than most libraries. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he'd told her, his voice rough but warm. "Just be ready." She adjusted the strap of her bag, the familiar weight, a comfort. She had been ready. She didn't look back at the plane or the crowd. She didn't need their adulation or their apologies. Her silence, her stillness, had been her shield and her statement. For those who had been so quick to judge, her actions were a mirror, and the reflection they saw was now their own burden to carry. The storm had passed, and in its wake there was only the quiet echo of the truth.